One of the effects of switching over to circuitry from mechanical moving parts and wheels is an enormous increase in the amount of information that is moving.
Yes.
You cannot cope with vast amounts of information in the old fragmentary classified patterns. You tend to go looking for mythic and structural forms in order to manage such complex data.
In the electric age, you don't have a continuity in the old sense. You don't have a strung out continuum. Everything happens at once. When you live in an information age, culture becomes big business, education becomes big business, and the cultural explosion or the information explosion becomes itself culture. It knocks down all the walls between culture and business. The future of the future is the present, and this is something that people are terrified of.
In 1609, in the remote village of Zugarramurdi in the Spanish Pyrenees, a woman by the name of Maria de Chimeldigi publicly announced that she had attended a witch's sabbath in a nearby cave. More importantly, she claimed others in the community had also been participants, going on to publicly accuse another woman of witchcraft in front of her friends and family. After this very public shaming, the woman confessed that she and others had been conducting rituals and communing with the devil under the cover of darkness. In the following days, more were accused and arrested, and the accusations escalated from there. By 1610, over 300 had been accused of attending this Black Sabbath, with 31 ready for trial. The accusations then spread to the nearby Basque village of Urdax and Labour across the French Pyrenees, where 80 people had been accused of being witches, found guilty and burned alive. At its height, over 7,000 people, mostly women, were being accused of engaging in witchcraft. 12 more in Zugarramurdi had been burned at the stake, and many others had been forced to make public confessions and were planned to be executed by the civilian government. After being sent to investigate the situation by the church, the Spanish Inquisition quickly concluded that the accusations must be true, because there was so much consistency and detail to the stories, but the sheer scale of the activities made them pause for thought. So they dispatched to the region the junior inquisitor Alonso de Salazar to conduct an independent investigation. Although a rookie, de Salazar came from a legal background and was unwilling to entertain folk tales about people with demonic superpowers, such as the ability to fly, shapeshift, or turn invisible. Like a detective working a case, de Salazar sought out facts and physical evidence. After reviewing 2,000 or so confessions made by the alleged witches, he found that nearly 3/4 had been made by children, and many others were the product of torture. Some who claimed to be witches were revealed to be fantasists, simply craving attention. Some accusations were made by people settling grudges, and others were the product of dreams. In fact, so gripped by the mania were these communities that there had been a dream epidemic, with dozens waking up from nightmares that they had been snatched by witches in the middle of the night and taken to participate in the depraved and surreal activities. To get to the bottom of it, de Salazar had each of the supposed witnesses taken to the cave where the events were supposed to have taken place, a place known today as the Cathedral of the Devil. One by one he asked each of them to explain exactly what had happened, and found that none of the testimonies were consistent, and in fact contradicted one another. The paltry physical evidence provided by the public also proved illusory. The Inquisition had been supplied with what they said were hallucinogenic potions, said to have been used in the magic rituals. To test this, de Salazar conducted an experiment and fed them to a cow to see what would happen. This turned out to be nothing, and further investigation found it to be made of pork fat, chimney soot, and water. In the end, he concluded, "I have not found one single proof, nor even the slightest indication from which to infer that one act of witchcraft has actually taken place. The testimony of accomplices alone, without further support from external facts substantiated by persons who are not witches, is insufficient to warrant even one arrest." Folk demonology in Europe was as old as time, but in recent years something new had entered the equation. Books. One genre in particular, witch hunting manuals, contained elaborate taxonomies of different demons and detailed descriptions of magic rituals said to have been performed by devil worshippers. Growing in popularity along the horrors of Europe's religious wars, these books had a conspiratorial edge and were widely read by the literate classes across Europe. Sometimes these books commanded enormous authority, such as the Demonology, written by King James IV of Scotland, who had also published the King James Bible. In it he outlined his theories about vampires, werewolves and sorcery, and it came to be an influence on the witches depicted in Shakespeare's Macbeth. Others, such as the Compendium Maleficarum, detailed the nature of magic potions used by witches and details of their secret pacts made with the devil. But the most influential of them all was the Malleus Maleficarum, commonly known as the Hammer of the Witches. Published by the rogue cleric Heinrich Kramer some centuries earlier, he took particular interest in the sexual depravity side of things, as well as accusing witches of infanticide and cannibalism, advocating for their complete extermination. Horrified at the potential social consequences of this book, the Inquisition had long tried to suppress it, but secular authorities kept on referring to it anyway when conducting local persecutions against religious minorities. The witch hunters of the 16th and 17th centuries were not theologians, but more like entrepreneurs, startups looking to cash in on the end times paranoia as a means of amassing enormous fortunes. The more supposed witches they found and persecuted in public view, the more credible the overarching mythology became, as did the appended political narratives that witches were plotting against the prevailing authorities. In 1981, the historian Gustav Henningsen coined a new term to describe this catalytic reaction when folk tales of witchcraft were afforded the validation and legitimacy of the educated elites and disseminated through their communication networks. He called it explosive amplification. Just as the religious enthusiasts of the 16th and 17th centuries embraced the medium of the printing press to spread their ideas, so in the 20th century they embraced the television. Today we call it televangelism, but when it first emerged in the late 70s, it was called the electric church. Through the ethereal tendrils of the communications satellite, they told the story of a conflict of cosmic dimensions between the forces of good and evil being waged across the battlefield of the mass media.
I want you to gather around the screen, the big screen we have for you.
You listen to me by television. You're in a battle. It's a battle of unprecedented proportions. He conducts himself through the TV screens and through Hollywood.
The Antichrist spirit through the media, through television, through radio, through newspapers.
Satan is piping into our living rooms and into our bedrooms. The worst filth, the worst rot, the worst hellish perversion. Nothing is holy.
The late 70s and early 80s had seen a renaissance in evangelical Christianity. It took material form in the vast stadium-sized megachurches that had decimated smaller ministries. Embracing the mass market and the mass media, Christianity had transformed into big business. The most influential of this new generation of tycoons was a former faith healer turned Christian media mogul, Pat Robertson, who for a time had the ear of US President Ronald Reagan to advise him on the finer details of end-time prophecy. Robertson was also accused of using charitable donations to fly heavy mining equipment to his diamond mine in Zaire. Robert Tilton, on the other hand, was said to have started his routine as a parody of a local preacher when he was in college, until he realised that people were actually falling for it and he could use it to make money. He then went on to combine his TV platform with a sophisticated direct marketing system to harvest money from the gullible and downtrodden.
We've seen midgets grow. We've seen arms and legs that stop growing because the growth cells that stop. I don't make this stuff up.
And I want you to make a $1,000 vow of faith. Oh, I know you probably don't have $1,000, but vow it.
Yes, it takes faith to make a $1,000 vow. Yes, and you're going to pay it because it's to God. How in the world is a dying, lost world ever going to hear the gospel if we don't have some Christians that's got some money in their pockets to propagate it? It's not fake. It's faith. It's not fake. I'm not fake. This is not fake. It's faith. Satan gave me this mess. It's a lie of the devil. I shouldn't have said that. I used to drink wine. I used to drink lots of alcohol and do lots of drugs.
Tilton had the showmanship and charisma to get away with such an audacious scheme, and many others wanted to jump on the bandwagon. Throughout the 80s, the cable TV and videocassette revolutions massively aided the spread of Christian conservatism, and many new voices came to thrive in this new medium to cash in on the end times industry, but many others did not.
If you don't surrender your will to him, there's no way you're going to make it in. No way. You're nuts, my friend. You're totally lost it if you believe that. You know, Kennedy was murdered by 3 terrorists. You know, the Dallas police were told to keep their mouths shut and close the file. And it was connected to the mafia, to the White House. You know, people don't even want to know the truth. People don't want to know the truth in the Bible. If you want to turn the channel, go ahead, fool, turn the channel.
And many did. For those appalled by the hucksterism and hypocrisy of the religious right, there were now an abundance of other channels to tune into. Since their explosion into popular culture since the 1960s, new religious movements had matured and evolved into more serious competition to Christianity. The jumble of Eastern religious beliefs, self-help soundbites, conspiracy theories, science fiction, and so on, had begun through the course of the 1980s to coalesce into a vast, compelling, and coherent hybrid cosmology that looked back to its own imagined golden ages.
Connecting tubes, breathing apparatus, the trappings of a space voyager.
You look at that whole gobbledygook that society has become, and one day you have to look at it and you have to say, I don't believe it.
A part of the hippie movement's loss of innocence was its discovery of the benefits of the free market, seeing business opportunities to peddle their new ideas through books and seminars, and likewise they mastered the propagandistic potential of cable TV, VHS and cassette tape revolutions.
It's called the New Age, a combination of spiritualism and superstition that has taken America by storm.
From New York to Los Angeles, people are purchasing or renting time on their favorite brain-tuning devices. Inventor David Graham was at the expo demonstrating this Graham potentializer. As the table rotates slowly, the fluids of the inner ear send impulses to the brain. Using goggles with strobing lights and earphones with strobing sounds, the Synchro Energizer brings the analytical left brain into synchronization with the creative right brain.
I just bought these soles that go inside your shoes, and they're filled with water, and they've changed my entire life.
Amino Edge is made from pure, free-form aminos.
I want you to look at the food, and I want you to register how much of that food is alive.
Super blue-green algae is a balanced, nutrient-rich whole food.
Hey, what you mean you don't like tofu? All the books say you're supposed to.
Well, my whole heart and soul and mind is in it, and I believe in all of it, and I have for many years.
What do you think about this festival?
My wife likes it.
How come you don't? Or do you?
Well, I don't buy half the things they preach here. I think they're making it up as they go along.
From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth.
His purpose, he feels, is just to make us wake up to the fact that we're all gods and goddesses, and you know, that's what the New Age really is about, is people awakening to their own divinity.
Spread the word of the reappearance of that being who is known as the Christ in the West,
and known as the Bodhisattva or Maitreya Buddha or the Imam Mahdi in the East, the world teacher.
And they feel it in their hands, and they make a love ball. And if you watch the little children doing this, they're totally focused on it. And then they pack all this love energy in their hands.
And may it seal the door where evil dwells.
And gradually, these new mind skills will become the curriculum of the future. Direct access to mental powers.
Do you see that happening?
Yes, it's happening already. Our kids are already tuned into it, and that's why you have the ET generation.
Throughout the 80s and the 90s, New Age beliefs were spreading through Western culture like a wildfire, and Christian conservatives reacted with a mixture of bemusement and horror that was literally apocalyptic.
Today, on the John Ankerberg Show, what does the Bible teach will be the characteristics of the false religion of the last days? In the latter times, the Bible says, some shall depart from the faith. That is, there will be a turning away from true Christianity and a growing apostasy. These events will set the stage for the coming of a new worldwide false religion and the ultimate deceiver, the Antichrist. But biblically, these events are also an indication to Christians that Christ's return is near. We will investigate whether any of the Bible's predicted characteristics of the false religion of the last days are occurring today.
Preceding him, there will be many different religious leaders like the Antichrist who will also deceive people and bring them away from the faith.
The New Age movement attempts to pull together all the religions of the world into one belief system. The movement has been successful in gaining the support of many religious cults.
They are all working together for a common goal, that is a new world government and a new world religion.
It looks as though something between 10 and 20% of the U.S. adult population has made such a shift in the last 20 years. That's a big group of people.
So it seems to me to be more old occultism rather than New Age.
What message would you give to our viewers?
Think for yourself and question authority.
Orthodox Judeo-Christian concepts of God and man are being replaced, and at a dizzying rate.
You remember the TV show Dynasty with Linda Evans? Well, Linda Evans openly admits to following the guidance of another spirit being called Mafu.
There's a capability for divine understanding within all humans to achieve the Christ consciousness, for the soul and the human mind to merge.
Henny Torres claims she is leaving her body to make room for the spirit Mafu.
This entity, this dead man, appeared to my right. I started thinking fantasies of Rosemary's Baby, you know, the whole thing.
She said the Undersecretary to the United Nations had personally met with Mafu and that they'd be meeting again. Torres's calling has turned into a growing business. She now runs Mafu seminars. The business of channeling generates millions of dollars from lectures, seminars, even the sale of audio cassettes.
If you are attempting to prove that this is all fraudulent and that's the opinion you've gained, I allow you that.
You have plenty of decadent cult followings on your planet.
According to the Los Angeles Times newspaper, there are now over 1,000 channelers in Los Angeles alone. Now, what's a channeler? Channelers are mediums, people who allow a spirit to take over their body and then to speak through them.
Channeling almost defies definition, but we did ask some well-known channels to give us a little help.
God bless you, Dr. Peebles.
Dr. Peebles is a 19th century philosopher.
All right, I'll say, how are you this day of your time as you create time to exist?
Bashar is an alien from outer space.
You are your Buddha. You are your God. You are your love.
No, I channel an energy that calls itself Torah. Torah is an interdimensional consciousness. And that means that he exists on many other dimensions, and I basically tune into him like a radio tuning into a radio wave. And so this phenomenon called metaphysics is becoming more and more very obvious and visible to more and more people.
People will base their religious beliefs on fables.
But Pentecostals have known a degree of power and nearness and proximity to God Almighty that maybe, I just say maybe, others have not known.
I am convinced this is a nation under God. And as long as we recognize that, believe that, I think he'll help us.
All the other religions can tell you something about God, but in Christ, you know God. And that makes all the difference from this world and the world to come, brother. That's got it all wrapped up.
I'd like to make a comment. I really am disturbed when any religious group says, we've got God. Because the Ayatollah Khomeini says exactly what you say. Because we watch what you fellas have been doing for 2,000 years, and it seems to me that Christianity, and then Christianity fighting Islam, is responsible for most of the bloodshed, most of the intolerance, most of the definitely holding back science. The manual of apocalypse and death is the Judeo-Christian Bible.
Don't you know that things have changed? They may, but this doesn't change.
It's true that their world is over. The old way of thinking, the old religion, the old sociology is over. Just the other day, our president said that he really believes the Bible prophecies are going to come true. He really sees all the signs coming that the Armageddon, the end of the world, is going to come in our time.
The prophets Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Zechariah all speak of a precise pattern of events that would come together just before the end of history in the great climactic war that will bring the Messiah.
The Battle of Armageddon. All the nations and kings of the earth will be there. First, they will fight against each other, and then against Christ.
To say that war in Lebanon has intensified is to very much understate developments.
Massive Soviet military forces have invaded the small, non-aligned, sovereign nation of Afghanistan.
The American embassy in Tehran is in the hands of Muslim students tonight.
There is an ominous New Year's warning tonight from the Mideast terrorist group, the Islamic Jihad.
Israel says today it shot down 22 Syrian fighter planes in aerial combat and lost none of its own.
It is a deliberate effort of a powerful atheistic government to subjugate an independent Islamic people.
I think the dangers, of course, are that without a war, we could lose oil.
And so the United States embarks on a Mideast mission which is haunted by one question. Will the Iranians try to attack the Kuwaiti ships now that they are technically American?
So there is no alternative to fighting.
Well, the Ayatollah's in a war. And if he's going to go on with provocative acts against us or anyone else, then he's running a great risk because we're going to respond.
Against the backdrop of this titanic cosmic culture war came a new explosive amplification, one that projected these fringe beliefs through the television and the cassette tape into the domain of mass culture.
A retail and entertainment complex of unequal variety and convenience.
Hello, America, how are you?
Make a professional statement and show that you have class in this suit from Jeans West.
I look forward to your becoming one of us.
And merge yourselves into the protective, exclusive shield of the club.
Tenderness destroyed as the lovers walk into the path of hell.
Terror will surround you.
Witches. Black artisans, celebrants of the Black Mass.
The fate of the world in the hands of these beautiful girls. Remember power.
It's the Barbie Cosmetics beauty set.
Evil powers are trying to brainwash this generation of children, but the truth will set them free.
If you're a lover of the world, you're a Satanist.
Society is breeding a new kind of criminal.
Pray you survive the night.
You are gonna die!
Your commitment of $15 a month, just 50 cents a day, helps keep the prayer lines open 24 hours a day.
Super Shopping Spree, Monday on AM.
Across this country and Canada, satanic graffiti is turning up on public buildings and abandoned buildings, where police suspect secret meetings are being held by people calling themselves Satanists. Mike Warnke is a former Satanist. Today he's a successful comedian, preaching Christianity in the form of humor. But back in the 60s, he was one of Satanism's high priests.
The hood, Mike, what's this for?
This is to create for whoever's practicing a magical atmosphere.
The colors mean anything?
Yeah, the red ones would be used for some types of sexual rituals, people who are doing sexual magic.
Officers here at the local police station in Sanford, Maine, had never even heard about satanic crimes. But that's all changed. They provide a checklist of 6 satanic practices to look for. For example, being placed inside a coffin. It's an experience that many children are describing. Another indicator, satanic paraphernalia. In every case, the children talk about precisely the same setting.
And they described people in black and white robes with hoods. They described a lot of candles.
Another indicator, kidnapping. In almost every case, the children have talked about children who were snatched and later sacrificed. Number 4, sexual abuse aimed at destroying faith in God. Cannibalism. It's difficult to believe.
The hearts were cut out, and the children were made to chew pieces of these children's hearts.
It is most common for the heart to be taken from the child and offered to Satan.
And finally, cremation. Most of the children describe witnessing it. It might explain why no bodies have been found.
They're not going to do some simple murder and leave a body in a stream for you to pick up the pieces of.
6 clues that point to the illegal worship of Satan, each based on the testimony of children. And none of it has ever been proved.
In 1983, ABC News broadcast a special report about the supposed epidemic of a new type of satanically motivated crimes. It was called the Devil Worshippers. Drawing upon the testimonies of Mike Warnke, Lawrence Pasdar and others, it presented no physical evidence that any of these stories were real, but was nonetheless a rating success. Smelling blood, the other news networks and independent media companies jumped on the story, and talk show titans such as Oprah Winfrey and Sally Jessy Raphael all followed suit. 5 years after the first ABC special, Geraldo Rivera broadcast his own TV special called Exposing Satan's Underground. It featured an array of special guests, including Ozzy Osbourne and Charles Manson.
Whether a Satan exists is a matter of belief, but we are certain that Satanism exists. To some it's a religion. To others it's the practice of evil in the devil's name. It exists, and it's flourishing. Members of our studio audience tonight will attest to that. They are friends and foes of Satanism, devil worshippers and law enforcers, experts and victims.
These programs were all composed of the same categories of characters, sometimes the same people. The first of these are fraudulent former Satanists, riffing on the tales of John Wayne Todd and Mike Warnke, a mix of out-and-out charlatans and deranged fantasists. And like Warnke, they casually admitted to bearing witness to or partaking in gruesome deeds such as murder, cannibalism and child sacrifice.
And then the high priest just took the athame, or the ceremonial dagger, and just cut the baby's throat.
The greater cries that he gave out, the greater the power derived from his life force leaving his body.
I was the head acolyte for that specific ceremony, and at the end of it, we wound up murdering someone. And
a person?
Yes, ma'am.
I was involved in it as a child. Of course, I was a generational Satanist, what they call a generational Satanist, and what that means is that my family was involved in it, and their family before them.
In the ritual where someone was murdered, and how were they murdered?
They were stabbed 7 times with knives because...
I know that the Lord has forgiven me, and my problem is can I forgive me?
Then there were the testimonies of those who claimed to have been victims of satanic cults, who, like Michelle Smith, had gone through many years of invasive therapy after coming in with a headache and leaving believing they'd been sexually abused by devil worshippers.
Right. When I was very young, I was forced to participate in that, in which I had to sacrifice an infant.
They stabbed the baby and killed it, and we all had
to drink blood.
A subset of these were the breeders, women who claimed they'd been raised secretly to give birth to babies that were used in human sacrifice.
Still, the greatest toll seems to be on the women who say that they have bred babies. Babies that were sacrificed for Satan.
I've seen them give their babies to Satan, some willingly, some have had them taken and then threatened so badly that they'll never tell anybody about it. These are not babies anybody knows about.
Lauren Stratford's book, Satan's Underground, detailed a harrowing youth of repeated sexual abuse by devil worshippers, where she was made to repeatedly give birth to children who were then sacrificed and eaten. Later investigations by authors Gretchen and Robert Passantino found her claims to be false, and furthermore that she had a history of mental illness and making false claims. In 1999, calling herself Laura Grabowski, she promoted herself as a survivor of Auschwitz, claiming she'd been experimented on by the Nazi scientist Joseph Mengele. But motivated either by desire for ratings or by ideological bias, nobody who interviewed Stratford or others like her at the time ever cared to dig deep into the claims. At best, hosts like Geraldo offered half-hearted impressions of skepticism.
Where is the proof? Why is there no proof if what you're saying is true?
Hi, Geraldo. There's no proof for a fact of one thing. They burn the bodies. They either do that, they'll chop them up and dump them in the ocean, or they'll pour them in concrete, or they take and they use them for communion and eat them and then make bones out of the tools.
Jackie, you have some pictures drawn during the therapy sessions by the people who've been through this. Why don't you show me some of them?
This picture is a person remembering skinning children and babies and hanging it out to dry. And skinning them, taking the skin off alive while they are alive, and skin them until they die.
Then there were the concerned parents, people made anxious to the point of madness at having to leave their children at nurseries and daycare facilities, and convinced they'd been made to participate in satanic rituals while they were at work. One of the long-term consequences of the contraceptive pill was a growing expectation that women should also be part of the workforce. Between 1973 and 1990, the median income of young families fell by about a third, and women felt no choice but to take on jobs and put their children in daycare with strangers. The guilt caused by this profound cultural shift caused enormous separation anxiety. This tension erupted into the public imagination after employees of the McMartin Preschool Centre in Manhattan Beach were accused by one of the mothers of sexually abusing her son. The situation then escalated from there, and soon the school was accused of 321 accounts of child abuse involving 48 children. Lawrence Pasdar was flown in as a consultant, and soon stories circulated that the abuse was satanic in origin. Interviews with children revealed stories of elaborate networks of tunnels beneath the school, with ceremonies taking place in bizarre places, such as hot air balloons. One child even implicated Chuck Norris as one of the abusers.
Parents have to be aware that children are not lying. Police officers have to listen to children.
In nurseries and daycare centers across the nation, there are increasing reports of ritual sexual abuse.
This organization is called Believe the Children. Its guiding principle that the stories these young victims are telling are too widespread, too consistent not to be true.
When the children started talking, they started talking about robes and candles.
One of the few pieces of physical evidence from the McMartin case, a black robe, later turned out to be a graduation gown. But while these horrifying stories were light on evidence, there were real instances of cruelty and violence to set in the context of the satanic mania. These were the killers, the headliner of which was Charles Manson, who was ghoulishly wheeled out for interviews to cryptically ramble on about his views on good and evil.
Okay, I killed everybody since day one. I murdered them all. I'm God and I've killed everybody. Or the devil. Oh, the devil, yeah, you could use the word devil or demons or whatever you want to call it. Mostly the devil in your world, eh? Well, okay, I'll play. There's no game I can't play. There's no game I haven't played. You are the devil. Okay, I'll be the devil then.
However, a handful of other murders were also drawn upon as evidence, notably the case of serial killer Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
We're happy to announce that the individual we have in custody is Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
All but one of the brutal murders took place in the summer of '85.
You don't understand me. You are not expected to. You are not capable of it. I am beyond your experience.
I am beyond good and evil. Legions of the night, night breed. Repeat not the errors of Nightcrawler and show no mercy. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells within us all. That's it.
Hail, Satan!
Hail, Satan!
Hail Satan! In court, Ramirez was defiant.
The man known as the Night Stalker has been sentenced to death in California.
I'll tell you what, I gave up on love and happiness a long time ago.
When he was a little boy, Richard Ramirez's mother said he used to love to dance to the radio. But unlike evangelical myths of the corrupting power of music, it was not the radio waves that turned him into what he became. Beaten by his father and sexually abused by a teacher, Richard befriended his cousin Mike when he was a teenager. Mike was a Vietnam veteran who'd just been released from psychiatric hospital and then introduced Richard to drugs. When they were both high, Mike showed the young Ramirez photos of women he'd raped, murdered and mutilated during the conflict, explaining the crimes in sadistic detail.
The great epochs of our life is when we gain the courage to rebaptize our evil qualities as being our best qualities.
Another familiar face on the talk show circuit was Sean Sellers, who in 1985 killed a convenience store clerk for refusing to sell him beer. A year later, he killed his own parents while they slept. After he was arrested, he quickly converted to Christianity and claimed he'd been possessed by demons.
Sean was shuttled from relative to relative, or left with babysitters. At 10, one of those sitters introduced him to Satanism, and Sean was hooked.
What did Satanism have to do with it, Sean?
It was a sacrifice to prove allegiance to Satan, to prove...
Does Satan make you commit murder?
Yeah, but Geraldo, Sean, in that particular situation, Sean Sellers...
This is Tom Wedge, an expert in Satanism who is with Sean in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Yeah, right. Go ahead.
Articulate, possessing boyish charm, and coached by evangelicals, Sellers played back to them their worst fears of corrupted innocence, appearing on talk shows and TV specials throughout the 80s and 90s until his execution in 1999. And appended to this were a handful of police officers and religiously motivated FBI agents who were convinced that there truly was something as satanic ritual murder.
People are starting now to realize that there is something else out there. A lot of cases are being reopened because of that.
Are human beings being sacrificed? Yes.
Do you believe there is a satanic aspect to these horrible crimes?
Yes, I'm sure there is, yes.
Bear in mind that they also incinerate. They have the cremators, and they destroy the bodies. There's no evidence.
Taken together and accepted uncritically, this mosaic of claims could paint a compelling picture of a real satanic conspiracy. And the only people willing to respond to these accusations were 3 members of Anton LaVey's almost defunct Church of Satan, who, thanks to Michelle Remembers, had taken a starring role in this dark mythology. In 1975, Anton LaVey himself had retired from the media glare. He'd stopped performing weekly rituals in his house and became in effect a recluse. And by the early 80s, the Church of Satan had degenerated into basically a mailing list. One of the causes of his withdrawal, it was said, was a schism within the church between LaVey himself and his former right-hand man, Michael Aquino. Soft-spoken and thoughtful, while stationed in Vietnam, he carried around a copy of Milton's epic poem, Paradise Lost, and developed elaborate theories on the human condition based on Milton's depiction of Satan. An individualist who famously said it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. In 1970, Aquino went as far as writing his own homage to Milton, the Diabolicon, which he set not in hell, but in San Francisco.
Dr. Aquino, the high priest of the Church of Set.
Temple of Set.
Temple of Set, also a colonel, interestingly enough, in the United States Army.
The Temple of Set is the Church of Satan grown up. The Church of Satan started out on a very self-indulgent, materialistic level. At the time, this was the way it was presented, that there was nothing more than that.
On this altar is one of a number of daggers, which we may use in our rituals. This one happened to belong to the commanding general of the most elite unit of Germany's infamous SS.
To conservatives, Aquino's theatrical, self-styled image fascination with Nazi memorabilia, and cerebral approach to occult philosophy was extremely disturbing, particularly given his work in US military intelligence. The Church's second defender was Anton LaVey's own daughter, Zina, the first person ever to receive a satanic baptism. Raised in the dysfunctional and hedonistic Black House, she became pregnant by the age of 13, teaching herself meditation, which she considered a form of magic, in order to cope with the agony of childbirth.
Zena says there is no truth to the news reports of satanic sacrifices, and she says Satanists are just getting a bad rap.
Children and babies should be held in the most sacred regard because we feel that they're the most natural and true magicians.
I think it just disturbs people that the word baptism is taken to celebrate the lust.
So meaning all of the romantic nights or whatever that made the child come to be a living entity should be something celebrated. So my baptism was something more of a glorification of life.
While Zena helped humanize their image, her husband, the performance artist, filmmaker, and occultist Nicholas Schreck, revelled in playing the foil to the Christian establishment.
Nicholas, what is the Werewolf Order? You represent the Werewolf Order.
Yes,
what is
I founded the Werewolf Order in 1984 as a vanguard for the coming Satanic century. We would like to see most of the human race killed off because it is unworthy. It is unworthy of the gift of life. And as we move into the Satanic century, we're going to see Christianity's last gasp. You've given up your ideals, and now you're joining the devil's ranks, which is to entertain people. You are now part of the media, which is something Jesus Christ would certainly not have condoned. So all I'm telling you is morality is a relative issue, and nobody can decide what is good and evil.
Is murder relative?
Murder is absolutely relative. When we sent troops to Vietnam to kill people, was it evil? Were those good murderers? Are there good murderers if they're wearing a soldier's uniform and bad murderers if they're not?
In the absence of any critical response from the hosts to the claims, it was up to this trio of characters to mount the critical reaction against the accusations.
And who was the grotto leader?
Do you have a name for him?
Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Not anymore, no. I have partial amnesia, specifically about that night.
Now, during that particular time period, I remember very little as far as details are concerned.
Since the 1970s, these fringe myths about satanic cults had spread through the communications networks of Christian evangelicals who were preoccupied with end-times prophecies. In the early 80s, misery memoirs like Michelle Remembers then introduced them to a wider general audience. But starting in 1983, the TV specials didn't just broadcast them to a mass audience, they gave them a credibility they had never had before. While these shows did little to convince the wider public, it provided evangelicals with what they considered powerful evidence that their worst fears were right all along. The 1988 Geraldo special was one of the most watched TV programs in US history. It was widely distributed on videotape and viewed in church groups to lend credibility to their claims. Televangelists and startup-like ministries also jumped on the bandwagon, publishing their own tapes and videos outlining their own hot takes on the satanic plot.
In the dark, there will be little babies sacrificed to Satan. There has been such an acceleration of worship of Satan that we believe that these sorts of things are happening, and we have evidence that they are.
I'm very upset. It's frightening and I'm scared.
It is war. Just think about some of the headlines we've had recently.
The explosion of media coverage itself became evidence that the epidemic of satanic crimes were true, resulting in packed journalism that recirculated the same stories and sought out new events to corroborate the expanding narrative. It began an accelerating feedback loop in which the growing atmosphere of paranoia led to more and more accusations, which were then recycled back into the media system. A spiral of social amplification that gave the epidemic the illusion of reality.
The real Satanists, the hardcore Satanists, are involved in criminal activity,
And for that reason, they are going to try and look as normal as possible, the better to be able to deceive you.
What we're dealing with at this point, in my belief anyway, is a well-organized religious and cult-based group that is widespread.
Priests, ministers, doctors, police officers, businessmen, oilmen, teenagers.
They could be your next-door neighbor.
These people are in every strata of society. We're talking doctors, we're talking lawyers, we're talking a lot of Christian ministers.
Could it be happening right now to the kid next door?
We have an epidemic of young people participating in some strata of Satanism.
To maybe somebody even in your own family. Satanism and the occult and what it's doing and will do to our children will not go away. Next door, on your newscasts, in your newspapers. It is not a fad, my friend. It's not only here to stay, but here to get worse. And the biggest tool that Satan has in his arsenal is
the planet Earth is dying. The disease is sin.
Mount St. Helens has erupted again. Initial reports say that a large mushroom-shaped cloud has risen almost 10 miles into the sky. Pilots flying over the volcano said the eruption looked like an atomic bomb. We return you to our regularly scheduled program.
The lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer.
Andreas fault system in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
There are some fires, obviously, in the city of San Francisco.
50 people are dead tonight because of this earthquake.
And a special report on the trials and tribulations of finding decent daycare. Details in 30 minutes. Join us.
Your cat is your friend, and he depends on you to take good care of him.
And destroy all life.
Secret bear will never tell.
What's Vietnam? A question a child might ask, but not a childish question. A question that in the past has led not to answers, but only to other questions. What were we fighting for? Why didn't we just drop the bomb? How could we fight an enemy we couldn't even see?
Life will fight in a war, Daddy.
In the news, the bomb that changed the world. The awesome power of nuclear energy was revealed 40 years ago when the United States used it to end World War II quickly. We'll be back with the atom bomb in the news.
Is there a well-organized plot, an insidious design right now to program and influence the minds of our children towards the occult and witchcraft? Let's go into another Scooby-Doo.
I'm going to hunt down that demon mist in the zone of eternal evil.
I'm absolutely astounded.
He-Man is being lifted up as a god, and many children are receiving him as such. Many faces becomes demon-possessed by drinking a magical potion that Skeletor gives him. And this young lady is involved in witchcraft, and you notice that she's a very voluptuous-looking thing.
So there's a sensuality about the toys also?
Yes.
Now, who lives in Snake Mountain?
Well, Skeletor lives in Snake Mountain.
Skeletor, the master of the universe. Does that give you kind of an example of...
Yeah, you should see the commercial they play with it.
This could actually be taken from Revelations.
Sure, it looks like it.
I cannot believe it.
This doll creates unreal beauty expectations in little girls. Levitation, psychic healing, mind control, mental telepathy. E.T. also included some inferences to homosexuality.
Here's an opening to one of the She-Ra cartoons, and it shows her getting her powers also. Now, wait a minute. This is not a pony, though. This is a unicorn.
Right.
Is there anything occultic or dangerous about Smurfs? No, what you're telling me then is that even Smurfs carry a homosexual connotation in that most of them are male.
I believe so. And some things have taken place in Care Bears that need to be talked about. Looking over a cauldron, and what he's looking over the cauldron, he's looking to see the children and see what they're doing. Through these violent movies and violent cartoons, they're teaching our children that the way to handle problems is through violence.
of the Crimson Guard. Introducing the leaders of the Crimson Guard, the evil twin brothers Tomax and Zaymot. And they're getting away in the Cobra Ferret.
He's taking on the look of the future soldier, so to speak.
I see a real trend toward what I call the barbarization of our children.
Children get the feeling that guns are in now, that shooting people is in.
Thanks to the long-term cultural impact of Rosemary's Baby and its copycats, the horror movie aesthetic had disseminated into popular culture. By the early 80s, even toys were packed with skulls, monsters, and other traditionally diabolical imagery. But such symbols were adopted even more enthusiastically in the world of heavy metal music, which found in them the perfect visual style for its irreverence and rebellion.
The satanic message is clear, both in the album covers and in the lyrics, which are reaching impressionable young minds.
There. The satanic pentagram. The upside-down cross. The blank eyes of the beast. The rebellion against Christianity. And again, the obsession with death. According to most groups, it's all done in fun. But according to police, it's having an effect on many children. A growing subculture that mixes heavy metal music with drugs and the occult.
It's just an outlet to have a good time. Parents think, oh, Satanism, their kids. It's killing their kids. It's not killing their kids. The parents are screwing up in the beginning. We're the next generation.
It's a complete evangelistic tool to draw young people away from Jesus and to worship the devil. That's it, simplicity.
Your groups such as Venom, Slayer, Merciful Fate.
Their music and their lyrics is espousing Satan worship and drugs among our kids, and you're looking at a preacher in Pine Bluff, Arkansas that's against it, and we're going to stand against it, and not just me, but in Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, California.
I do. I hate my mom.
Why?
Love her. Because she's a bitch. Like, she just won't let me do what I want. She's... Yeah. She doesn't let me have friends. She makes me come home at 11 o'clock on Friday or Saturday night.
It's one of the greatest evangelistic techniques that the devil has ever conjured up out of the pits of hell.
How can we think or concentrate on pure and good thoughts when the driving beat is pumping our minds full of sinful thoughts and our bodies full of sinful movement? Everything that we do should be to glorify Jesus Christ.
There's nothing wrong with checking out their music and books they're reading.
These young people are being programmed through the music to believe that hell is a fun place to be.
This perception of the malevolent power of metal was not helped by the fact that Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, claimed he listened to AC/DC's Highway to Hell in order to get in the mood for killing. As fearful as they were of the explicit impact of rock music on behaviour of their children, in terms of dress and attitude, some believed the situation was even more nefarious. That these records contained secret subliminal messages that could alter their behaviour by speaking straight to their subconscious.
Let's hear that Snowblind backwards now. Now if you listened, you heard him say, "Oh, Satan, move in our voices. Satan, Satan, Satan. He is God, he is God, he is God."
Smoking marijuana, listening to Judas Priest, and contemplating suicide. Ray was dead within seconds. Jay wounded himself, survived for 3 years, but later died from what doctors termed complications of his injuries.
James and Ray were chanting, "Do it, do it, do it." They did not even know where it came from.
It came from the Judas Priest album, according to Dr. Wilson Bryan Key, a professor of marketing who has written extensively on subliminal messages. He says the song Better By You, Better Than Me contains the barely audible words, "Do it," repeated over and over.
And each time "do it" is increased in hysterical intensity. So it's "do it, do it, do it, do it."
This case will not be new 5 years from now. It will be the equivalent of cigarettes causing cancer.
The boys' family sued the band and their record company, CBS,
blaming their product for driving the boys to shoot themselves. And today, the case went to trial in Reno. What makes it even more incredible is that the lawsuit contends the teens were influenced by subliminal messages of death and suicide on the record.
The music has actually, in his words, brainwashed the two boys.
Judas Priest, from West Bromwich in England, were not aware of the depth of America's pathology around Satanism, and said if they were going to insert subliminal messages into records, it would be to tell their listeners to buy more of them. Nevertheless, thanks to the self-referential nature of the media, it became a widespread assertion that there was a causal relationship between heavy metal and violence. This is why in 1988, Black Sabbath's Ozzy Osbourne was invited onto the Geraldo special and asked to explain himself.
Every single kid whose case we know about, who committed a violent act in Satan's name was also into heavy metal music. What's your response to that, Oz?
Well, I don't really know. All I do is make music. You know, I don't sit down and purposely plan to freak everybody out. I don't want to make anybody start doing all this devil worship crap, because that's not my intention. Although I have sang on a few songs about the devil, you know, that's about it. You know, I don't want anyone to harm themselves.
What about the issue of responsibility? What about the whole thing about guilt? Do you feel responsible?
I don't feel guilty. I feel kind of persecuted by everybody.
Heavy metal wasn't the only thing being blamed for casting its suicidal spell over the young. Games were also being blamed, specifically games such as Dungeons and Dragons.
It's been connected to a number of suicides and murders. Daniel and Stephen Irwin, 16 and 12, a murder and a suicide. The police said they were obsessed with the game. Dr. Thomas Radecki is a psychiatrist who teaches at the University of Illinois Medical School and who is chairman of the National Coalition on Television Violence.
One case, the parents saw their child summon Dungeons and Dragons demons into his room before he killed himself.
Games like Dungeons and Dragons incorporate actual occult practices into the body of the game.
About 2 months ago, a green eyeball was seen up in the sky.
In fact, research into the influence of role-playing games today has shown them to be associated with greater capacity for creativity and critical thinking. But this didn't stop Pat Pulling blaming the game as a way of trying to make sense of the suicide of her son.
After her son's death, Pat Pulling thoroughly investigated the game. She felt so strongly that it was responsible for her son's death that she formed a network of concerned people to warn others about the dangerous aspects of the game.
It is role-playing, which is typically used for behavior modification. If you are using behavior modification and you are doing violent roles and you're doing negative roles continuously, these children not only begin to have violent dreams or violent thoughts or negative, depressing type things, they become very much a part of this character. Children are dying, Ed. Children are dying out there, and people are not telling.
When the game is over, the game does not tell you to go out and rape and plunder.
She formed a pressure group called Bother About Dungeons and Dragons, BAD, which set out to expose the game as being responsible for inciting suicide, schizophrenia, depression, rape and murder. That it taught real magic powers that allowed children to commune with demons. Sean Sellers' handlers had clearly heard of the game and incorporated it into his excuse he had for killing his own parents.
We had a very stylistic type coven. We'd taken stuff that we'd learned from Dungeons and Dragons and things we'd learned from books and magazines and movies and everything, and used it all together, and it worked. But I read something from Psalms and I realized that Jesus really loved me.
But even as the hysteria reached its height towards the late 80s, much of the general public remained to be convinced. But this broad public skepticism didn't stop local police departments actively getting involved, watching training materials produced by local churches. They also attended seminars and conferences about the nature of these satanic crimes, swapping clues and tips about how to best catch the cults.
Well, I've been a police officer for 15 years, and probably during that entire 15 years, I have seen things which we now label as ritualistic in nature, but never recognized.
We really don't know how much activity we have. I can tell you there's lots of it, more than I could possibly handle, more than a small task force could handle in Los Angeles.
Randy Eman is a police officer who spends much of his time investigating crimes that have links to the occult.
There are many crimes that are unsolved in our cities, and many of those crimes have ritualistic overtones, but they're hard to find, and it's difficult to find the depth of where these things go and who may have done them.
Z-E-N across her chest in her own blood. It made no sense to them. It made no sense because they're not Satanist.
In investigating homicides, there are some very obvious ritualistic markings that will appear on a body that is the result of satanic killings. A cut that goes from behind the ear all the way down to the throat.
9 represents the 9 satanic statements. You can find this in a book by Anton Sanzer LaVey.
And you can see here, if you just look right over here, the satanic eye.
This oftentimes is the signature of the high priest.
Then, a new case emerged, which seemed to evangelicals to be the smoking gun.
The slaughter in Matamoros helped to awaken the nation to a growing nightmare.
Just last April in Mexico, police were horrified to discover an iron cauldron containing dried blood, a roasted turtle, and a human brain.
In Matamoros on the US-Mexican border, evidence was discovered of mass graves that were the result of what seemed to be unambiguous black magic rituals. But while superficially fitting the bill of the satanic cult killing, even down to the cauldron, the story of Matamoros turned out to be much stranger. During spring break in 1989, American student Mark Kilroy disappeared. His body was later found along with 12 others who'd fallen victim to a Mexican drug smuggling gang.
What time did you all kill him?
What was that?
What time did you all kill him?
In the afternoon, at around 2.
2 o'clock in the afternoon?
Yes, sir.
More than just being murdered, they were dismembered, and their body parts were used in strange rituals designed to infer magic powers over their enemies. Like other Mexican drug smugglers, the gang engaged in a form of indigenous witchcraft called Palo Mayombe, a black magic originating in the Congo, which regularly involved the sacrifice of goats, zebras, lion cubs, and drinking liquids in which human bones had been boiled. The gang was dubbed by the Mexican media the Narco-Satanists. At first, the gang's leader, Adolfo Constanzo, took to grave robbing to keep up his stock of bones. But soon, this proved not to be enough. By 1986, now exceedingly wealthy through the drug trade, he took to murder, killing at least 23 individuals in Mexico City alone. Then, in 1989, he found new inspiration.
The Believers.
A new Martin Sheen film about a cop investigating a series of ritual murders orchestrated by a cabal of secret conspirators.
It's a power you can't imagine. Power to create a world of our choosing. Power to destroy those who oppose us.
This, in turn, was based on a trashy paperback called The Religion, which was itself riding the satanic ritual abuse bandwagon in the early 80s. Through a mass media feedback loop, the explosive amplification of satanic ritual crime had inadvertently contributed to its own worst nightmare. But while the evangelicals were wholly wrong about a great many things, in another sense they were entirely correct. Because there was a hidden network of cabals and cells sharing secret knowledge and conspiring to brainwash and steal their children, hiding in plain sight in the elite of society and broadcasting their ideas across the media. These were the psychiatrists.